We continue with our discussion of The Dawn of Everything by David Graeber and David Wengrow. This is the fourth part of our interpretation. First, a brief digression. Graeber and Wengrow wrote this book not so much to tell a compelling story to the public but rather to challenge the academic establishment. Instead of constructing a new grand theory, they aim to question the dominant academic narrative that has persisted since Rousseau. This is an extremely difficult task. It requires integrating the latest archaeological discoveries and ethnographic studies, employing interdisciplinary analysis, and, most crucially, continuously pointing out how their arguments differ from previous scholars and why those scholars were wrong while they are right. This approach poses a challenge for readers. Many would prefer a clear and complete picture of human history from 30,000 years ago to today. But even by the final chapter, the book never presents a fully coherent image. This is understandable. Current archaeological evidence remains incomplete, and the book inevitably includes speculative interpretations. However, the authors make many implicit suggestions. As a popular science writer, I feel an obligation to extract that overarching picture. I may present things in a more definitive manner, purely to make the information easier for you to absorb. If human history were a criminal case, Graeber and Wengrow would be forensic analysts reconstructing the crime, while I would directly tell you how the incident unfolded. But simply recounting a story would not be very informative. The real value lies in combining the narrative with underlying ideas. The book's most important intellectual thread is whether human history is linear or cyclical. The education we received from a young age, along with the views of many scholars, such as Jared Diamond, author of Guns, Germs, and Steel, The Fates of Human Societies, and Yuval Harari, author of Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind, subscribes to the idea that historical evolution is linear. It progresses from primitive to advanced, from simple to complex, continuously improving alongside technological advancements, following the principle that productive forces determine social relations. According to this logic, inequality is an inevitable consequence of agricultural technology. Early humans, lacking private property, lived relatively egalitarian lives. The advent of agriculture introduced private ownership, leading to class divisions and, ultimately, authoritarianism. Validating Rousseau's fundamental argument, with only minor details up for debate. Graeber and Wengrow, however, challenge this notion. They argue that history is primarily cyclical. As discussed previously, early societies often operated under a dual system alternating between democracy and autocracy. Sometimes equal, sometimes hierarchical. Sometimes living together, sometimes dispersing. Such cycles also exist on a much larger timescale. For instance, archaeological evidence suggests that prehistoric Japan experienced continuous fluctuations between settlement and dispersion. From around 14,000 BCE to 300 BCE, societies followed a roughly century-long cycle. At times, they gathered to construct monumental structures with specialized labor and elaborate burial rituals. But after about 100 years, they dispersed again, reverting to a simpler yet freer way of life. Why this constant back and forth? Was urban life and technological advancement not desirable? From the perspective of people living in those times, technology was not always beneficial. Even the Industrial Revolution initially led to miserable working conditions. More importantly, people have always had agency in choosing their social organization. You may believe a certain lifestyle is superior, but others might simply not want to live that way. Autocracy might eventually provoke a shift toward democracy. Only for democracy to later face challenges, creating openings for new rulers. Human agency is always at play. Take identity politics as an example. As previously discussed, groups sometimes adopt distinct lifestyles purely to differentiate themselves from neighboring groups. A phenomenon anthropologist Gregory Bateson termed schismogenesis. Consider gender identity. Boys and girls share far more similarities than differences, yet at a certain age, children develop a gendered self-perception. A boy may avoid certain behaviors simply because they are considered girly, while a girl may consciously reject overly masculine actions. Similarly, when the Wendat people criticized Europeans for their obsession with money, they were also affirming their own cultural pride. Technology fosters globalization and convergence. As people learn from one another, but before the Industrial Revolution, technological progress was extremely slow. In contrast, identity politics and conscious social choices have historically been much stronger forces. Now, let's discuss agriculture. Scientists do not know exactly when Homo sapiens developed language and abstract thinking. Estimates range between 200,000 and 50,000 years ago. In evolutionary terms, our history as an intelligent species is brief. Compared to Earth's long climatic cycles, our existence is insignificant. For millions of years, Earth has experienced alternating glacial, ice age, and interglacial periods approximately every 100,000 years. During ice ages, global temperatures dropped significantly, sometimes by as much as 8 degrees Celsius. Only in short interglacial periods, lasting roughly 10,000 years, did temperatures warm up. Ice ages were the norm, warm periods were exceptions. Governed by Earth's orbital and axial cycles. Around 130,000 years ago, Earth entered a warm phase known as the Eemian interglacial, but at the time, Homo sapiens were too few in number and possibly lacked language, preventing significant advancements. For the next 100,000 years, the planet remained cold. Though intelligent, early humans struggled to survive, primarily hunting large mammals like mammoths. Then, around 12,000 years ago, Earth entered another warm period, the Holocene. This time, we seized the opportunity for expansion, possibly even influencing global warming to prevent another ice age. As glaciers melted and forests expanded, fruits and small mammals flourished. Coastal and riverine areas became resource-rich paradises for hunter-gatherers. It was in this context that agriculture emerged. Archaeological evidence suggests agriculture was independently invented in 15 to 20 regions worldwide, each domesticating different species and following unique trajectories. The earliest agriculture in the world is believed to have originated around 10,000 years ago, in the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East. This region stretches roughly from the eastern Mediterranean coast, including present-day Palestine and Israel, through Syria and Turkey, and extends to the borders of Iran and Iraq, surrounded by deserts, mountains, and seas. We can roughly divide this region into two parts: the northern highland area and the southern lowland area. The people in these two regions maintained cultural and trade exchanges, and both had suitable conditions for agriculture. However, due to their distinct identities, they chose completely different paths of development. The Highlanders continued hunting and gathering. They were patriarchal, warlike, and semi-nomadic, but gathered annually for large-scale rituals at monumental sites featuring carvings of ferocious beasts and human skulls. Gruesome by modern standards. As a warrior society, the Highlanders naturally had a hierarchical and unequal social structure. The Lowlanders, in contrast, were a peaceful and egalitarian people. They preferred permanent settlements, developed sophisticated handicrafts, and practiced agriculture. However, their agriculture was not a full-time specialized activity. It was more like casual farming. They would find a random plot of land near their homes, preferably a fertile floodplain left behind by receding waters, scatter some seeds with little care, and in a few months, harvest the crops. For the Lowlanders, farming was merely a supplement to their food supply, perhaps even just an excuse for communal activities. Hunting and gathering remained their primary means of survival. Interestingly, the Lowlanders placed significant value on women's rights. While it wasn't a matriarchal society, political power was still held by men. Women played a crucial role in household management, especially in agriculture. Since farming was only done casually, it didn't require heavy labor, making it entirely different from the later model of men farming, women weaving. The Highlanders always looked down on agriculture, while the Lowlanders farmed intermittently. This pattern continued for thousands of years. Classic divergent evolution. This stands in stark contrast to the agricultural revolution described in textbooks. A true revolution is when a new technology is invented, immediately transforms people's lives, and rapidly spreads across the world. If agriculture had been a revolution, it would have been terrible news for the people at the time. Yuval Harari's description in *Sapiens* is particularly striking. Wheat domesticated humans. Wheat, at its core, is just a type of grass, and we eat its seeds. Wild wheat already existed on Earth, and if people wanted to eat grass seeds, they could simply gather some wheat stalks. However, this simple act of gathering led to unforeseen consequences. In the wild, mature wheat naturally sheds its seeds, allowing them to fall to the ground and sprout on their own, requiring no human intervention. Occasionally, genetic mutations caused some wheat plants to retain their seeds instead of shedding them. Normally, such wheat would not have survived in nature. But once humans began gathering and eventually planting wheat, these mutated strains also had a chance to propagate. Perhaps their seeds were larger and sturdier, or maybe it was just by chance. But gradually, wheat that did not shed its seeds became dominant. Without human care, these plants couldn't reproduce. The result? We had to harvest and plant them manually. And since we were already doing that, we had to prepare the soil, irrigate the fields, and remove weeds. Think about this process. Initially, wheat grew naturally, and humans only needed to pick it. Now, humans were forced to tend to it every step of the way. This led Harari to ask, did humans domesticate wheat, or did wheat domesticate humans? The same applies to other agricultural products. Pigs and sheep, for example, originally lived independently in the wild. Once domesticated, they lost their ability to survive without human care. Thus, professional agriculture inevitably required significantly more labor. Not only did people work harder, but their diet worsened. They now mainly ate grass, seeds, and only occasionally had meat. Archaeological evidence shows that, after the transition to agriculture, people became shorter, suffered from malnutrition, and had more cavities due to their grain-heavy diet. Furthermore, living in permanent settlements, especially alongside domesticated animals, made them more susceptible to infectious diseases. If someone back then had promoted the wonderful life of the Neolithic era, farmers would have protested. This likely explains why early humans were reluctant to embrace agriculture. Experiments using the most primitive farming methods suggest that wild wheat could be fully domesticated within as little as 20 to 30 years, or at most 200 years. This means that if early humans had been willing to farm, agriculture could have spread worldwide almost instantly. Yet in reality, it took over 6,000 years for agriculture to become the dominant way of life. Because no one wanted to be a full-time farmer. Agriculture had its advantages. It produced higher yields, was more stable, and supported larger populations. But the downsides were significant. This explains why in regions such as the Amazon rainforest, North America, and even China, early humans either farmed casually or abandoned farming after a while. Agriculture repeatedly rose and fell. Full-time farming was an economy of scarcity. Early adopters were often those with no other options. Moreover, they typically settled in areas unattractive to hunters and gatherers. Choosing agriculture meant imposing restrictions on oneself. Farmers had to stay in one place, dedicating significant labor to tending the land, which reduced their ability to control surrounding areas. Since they had to wait for harvests, they naturally valued peace, which made them weaker in combat compared to hunter-gatherers. Of course, farming populations grew, and some could be enlisted as mercenaries. But population growth was not limitless, as farmers were highly vulnerable to plagues and wars. Archaeological evidence shows that an entire large farming community in Europe was once wiped out by hunter-gatherers, with the women taken captive. Even after agricultural societies emerged, they coexisted for a long time with neighboring nomadic tribes. Often referred to, somewhat pejoratively, as barbarians. Farmers, unable to endure oppression, could see their states collapse, while nomads, skilled at warfare but poor at governance, struggled to sustain large-scale societies. As a result, neither side could break free from its ecological niche. Even after agriculture became widespread, many farmers actively chose to join the nomadic tribes. This proves one thing: humans are not slaves to technology, and history is a matter of choice. That's it for today's content. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
If you feel there is value in this, please like, subscribe to this channel, and leave your thoughts or suggestions in the comments section. Let's grow together and read more good books.